Good morning. Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Renee Peaty from Striven. For those of you who don't know of us, we're your one-stop shop for everything, for curated PD content, for coaching, mentoring, networking, and also for courses. And every month we hold a webinar tackling big themes, and inclusion is our topic for March. How we identify and leverage individual strengths is fundamental to enhancing employee engagement and productivity. And positive psychology underpins workplace inclusion by recognizing and valuing the unique strengths that each employee brings to the team. That's regardless of their background or identity. And to help us better understand how to use positive psychology, we have invited Nikki Tugano, who is the founder and CEO of SeenCulture, to share her experiences. Nikki is passionate about recognizing and developing human potential in organizations. She is a pioneer for creating inclusive and high-performing teams in the future of work, and supported by her background as an experienced HR leader, positive psychology practitioner, and now tech startup founder. Over to you, Nikki.
Thank you so much. It's such a kind welcome. I'm really happy to be here delivering this session. It runs really deep in terms of the things that I really care about, in terms of how we can apply positive psychology in the workplace, have it a little bit more of a mainstream approach to how we can cultivate more well-being, motivation, and performance, and in particular, the role of that in fostering inclusive cultures. So thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure.
I'll kick off by just giving a little bit more context on my background as it relates to this topic. As Renee mentioned, I'm Nikki from SeenCulture. Now, SeenCulture is an early stage startup and has very much been inspired by the work that I had done and the research I had done previously in positive psychology. In particular, self-determination theory, which I will go on to speak to in the presentation. But just to give some context in people's minds, some of you might have watched or read the book Moneyball. So it's both a movie and a book, and the full title is Moneyball: The Art of Winning an Unfair Game. And what the role that we play, I often talk about me being like Jonah Hill, but with tech and a little less chubby. But we're effectively, we do player analytics to identify players that are traditionally undervalued and overlooked using data-driven practices to ensure that everyone's assessed on a level playing field. And so it's been a big driver as to what's really helped motivate a lot of, our philosophy behind SeenCulture. Now, outside of that, and before I started this business, I worked in HR. I've got 12 years experience working there across both the UK and in Australia. In various HR leadership roles. I'm actually joining you today from Vegas at a conference here called Transform, and it's specifically focused on HR tech. And it's just amazing to see, the new cutting edge sort of solutions that are out there and approaches, new HR leaders are taking too. Now, in parallel to that, I have also worked as a management consultant in employee experience and customer experience consulting. But additionally, I have a background in positive psychology. I got my master's, a scholarship for that over in the UK to do my master's in positive psychology and coaching psychology. And following that, I was asked to teach at Melbourne University in this space, now called the Centre for Wellbeing Science, but I taught on subjects such as the science of wellbeing, motivation, and performance in organizations, and also positive leadership and careers. Today, SeenCulture is my baby and where I spend all of my time. And so I'll take you through a little bit of what we do there and how that relates to how, we're creating inclusive cultures where everyone feels seen. So this idea of not being seen isn't only hurtful to employees, but also to businesses. Now, as human beings, it is our innate human need to want to feel seen, seen for our, who we are, not just on the outside, but on the inside. And when we don't feel seen or valued, appreciated, understood, recognized, we start to question our satisfaction in our current circumstances. And we tend to start looking, or at least being open to other job opportunities outside of where we work. Now, as a consequence, what that means for businesses is that if they need to replace this outgoing talent, that can cost up to 3 times that individual's salary. And so let's just say, conservatively, if 5 people on 100K are leaving a business, that's up to $1.5 million that's lost in recruitment and training costs, IP, productivity, morale, and reputation. And so it's not only hurtful to employees on a personal level, but it's really hurtful to businesses' bottom line. And we can see the impact on it from a financial perspective. Now, this role of bias for unseen talent is quite paramount. There are a number of unconscious cognitive biases that we as human beings experience and have. And so there's one that's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where we can often mistake confidence for competence. And so this is where we also tend to over-embellish our own capabilities relative to what other people might perceive of us. And so it's really important that we take that into consideration when we're assessing how capable we think an individual is. Other biases, such as affinity bias. This is where we often have a preference for people who we're similar to, or we have a shared experience with them because we resonate, right? And so we might have a preference for people that we tend to like, or that maybe they went to the same university as us, or they've had a similar career trajectory. Oh, you're also a consultant? Me too. Oh, you also work for these clients? Me too. Oh, you also are, someone with this particular mindset around this? Me too. It means that we end up having preference for people that are just like us, and we're not really testing the boundaries in terms of offering different perspectives. There's also
I know I know a lot of people that have recruited people because they remind them of themselves when they were young.
Yeah.
So they've followed maybe it's a personality characteristic, or maybe it's a similar career trajectory, but you're like me. So therefore, you'll fit in nicely here.
Yeah, exactly. It's very hard to mitigate against because we want to work with people that we like, you know?
Exactly.
Um, but there are some limitations to that, because it means then we end up sometimes being in our own echo chamber, right?
No
Um,
fresh ideas or insights, different
ex-
perspectives.
yeah, exactly right. And that just goes to show like why I have this graphic on the right hand side here. And we can see that they all look the same, but actually, the point of this is to demonstrate that they don't have any fresh ideas, because they've submitted to these biases, which we as human beings, we all have. But what we need to recognize is what that means for our blind spots. And if we do happen to have, for instance, a leadership team that's full of white men, for instance, it means that they are lacking the perspective of half the population.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that is a significantly huge part of, whether it's their workforce or the customers that they serve, that's a huge blind spot.
Exactly. And it's one of those things I think that we've been talking about recently with International Women's Day, and the lack of women that are able to scale that, career trajectory of working in exec level roles.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I saw this so much when I, working in HR, particularly when we were doing our annual performance reviews and reassessing people's pays and who we were going to promote. It was so it was so disheartening, but also quite sobering how much favoritism still plays a role,
Yeah.
because it's the shorthand way to make these decisions.
And there are a lot of decisions to make. So let's make some quick decisions based on what we know.
Exactly right, Renee.
Mm.
And so, just a little bit on SeenCulture and what we do is we help enable business leaders to make more intelligent decisions. How can they make decisions that are faster, smarter, and fairer when it comes to things like pay and performance reviews, team design, and succession planning. Now, obviously, what's come out recently is the WGEA report on the gender pay gap. And the perspective certainly that SeenCulture takes is that in order to close that gender pay gap, what we need to do is really revisit our practices when it comes to how we do pay reviews. Now, ideally, pay reviews are supported with performance metrics. And ideally, those performance metrics are also measured on a level playing field, and that we're assessing everyone fairly and equitably across the organization. Now, if we see disparity in an organizational hierarchy where we recognize that there's greater diversity, perhaps maybe at the bottom of the hierarchy, because we've made some intentional efforts to recruit more diverse talent. If we haven't put in the same intentional efforts to also promote and give opportunities to them once they're in the door, then what we'll continue to see is less diversity when we're climbing up the hierarchy and in those top tier leadership roles. Now, as a result, we know that higher paying people tend to be at the top of the pyramid. And so that's where we're often seeing that disparity, because we have such a big population of our underrepresented people in the workforce in the lower levels of the organization, where they're getting lower pay versus those higher top executive leadership positions.
So they're not in a lot of decision-making roles themselves.
That's right. Yeah. The thing that we're really passionate about is, how can we enable decision makers to create a more diverse leadership pipeline and be strategic about that, so that they're keeping an eye on who's this high potential untapped talent that's coming through that we can really nurture in their development, such that, they can really level up in terms of their development, but also, deliver on those outcomes that the business needs to. So, what is positive psychology? Now, it's often perceived in the context of, well, what is traditional psychology or negative psychology? There is no negative psychology, at least not to my knowledge. But traditional psychology will tend to focus on what is wrong with us. So typically, if you hear someone say, "Oh, I'm seeing a psychologist," the stereotypical thought that might come to mind is, "Oh, there's probably they're probably experiencing some level of hardship around their mental well-being, and therefore they're mentally unwell, and they're just trying to find their path to getting better and feeling normal again."
Having some challenges.
Yeah, exactly. They're having those challenges, and maybe they have to unpack their past to really uncover what is going on under the surface.
Yeah.
And so it's really the psychology of what's wrong with us, right? Positive psychology, on the other hand, is the psychology of what is right with us. What is it about us that makes us flourishing, that makes us successful, that makes us, optimizing to our full potential? And so at the crux of it, psychology is the science of human behavior. One side of it focuses on, what's wrong with us. The other side of it, positive psychology, focuses on what's right with us. And so it's a in the field of psychology, it sort of came into play in the late 1990s, whereas traditionally so much of the focus was in how can we fix ourselves rather than how can we be better. So I personally don't work with a clinical population. I work with a lot of people in the workplace that are actually exceptional in what they do. I love studying them, and what are the ways in which they're outliers in what they do too. And so Peter Drucker, he's very well-known management consulting background, and this is a quote by him: "One should waste as little effort as possible on improving areas of low competence. It takes far more energy to improve from incompetence to mediocrity than it takes to improve from first state performance to excellence."
It's really a mindset shift, I find, because I do think that we spend so much time thinking about what our dev needs are and
Mm.
how do we improve upon them, as opposed to what are our strengths and how are we planning to develop them.
Absolutely. Like the other version of this that someone reflected back on me, it's like you're better off focusing on the areas that you're good at rather than being less shit at what you're already not so great at.
I like that.
Yeah, yeah. And so, what is the return on investment of a strengths based approach? Well, Gallup, some of you may have heard of, they've done a lot of work in this space and did a meta analysis like years and years ago now. Like this has been around for quite a long time. But a lot of the research that they've done covered, I'm pretty sure from memory, I think it's something like 40 or 50,000 different data points from employees across a number of different organizations globally. And what they found is the ROI of a strengths-based approach results in up to 90% increased sales, 29% increased profit, higher customer engagement, lower turnover, looks like I've got that there twice, but lower turnover from both a customer perspective and an employee perspective.
Okay.
And then an increase also in engaged employees and fewer safety incidents. And so it's really interesting to see the tangible bottom line impact on having a strengths-based approach and looking at how we can really lean into that rather than focusing in on our weaknesses. Now, as employees, our needs have evolved and they continue to evolve over time. Now, we used to think of work as an exchange of labor for pay. But work today means so much more than that. It's a source of connection. It's a source of identity. It's a source of structure in our lives. And that being said, there are so many organizations out there that haven't quite updated their practices to help serve our evolved needs. Right. And so as a result, there's this growing pool of dissatisfied and overlooked employees, such that turnover is actually predicted to continue increasing moving forward. Now, engaging and retaining talented and high potential employees is harder than ever because they have a lot more power and influence in terms of what they have available to them. And so what that means is we need to be a lot more intentional as to how we can really retain this talent. And going back to my slide earlier on, what is the cost of losing this untapped talent? It's quite high.
It's huge.
Mm. And so what you can see here, some of you might be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so if I relate that back to how we might perceive these needs in an organizational setting as employees, our basic needs for work is that we get an income, right? We get an income to put a roof over our heads, to put food on the table, and they're our physiological factors. What would be great as an extension beyond that is that we have some sense of job security there, where we've got a greater sense of safety. Now, what we expect in addition to that is connection, a sense of belonging and inclusivity to the workplaces that we're a part of. We want to be not only connected to the actual job that we have, but the people that we work with and the purpose of the organization that we work for. Then we go on to strengths. So our need for self-esteem is very directly linked to our need to be able to play to our strengths, where we're performing a role that enables us to do something that we know we're good at and can grow and develop further, because that directly fuels our self-esteem, because it's something that we know that we're good at. And then, moving up toward this idea of self-actualization, how can we create a greater sense of like we're fulfilling our full potential, we're being really purposeful in the work that we do as well.
It's more than just a job. This is what I'm meant to be doing, and I can see, I'm achieving my goals. I'm achieving goals outside of myself. I'm working towards a greater good or a greater purpose.
Exactly.
And I think that whole connection piece is so important as well, because it also stems back to, they get me. So in that, aligned to the positive psychology, these people understand me. They understand my strengths, and I understand how I'm contributing to, the greater good.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, as a business, so that's looking at it from an employee or an individual perspective. But as a business, the needs of what we need in terms of talent is evolving too. So the evolution of the employee value for business has also changed and evolved. Centuries ago, what we used to care about is economic capital. What are the tangible assets that someone has that if we engage them as an employee, we can then acquire. Then it evolved to human capital. So what are your qualifications? What's your experience? What's your background? Or your IQ? It's then evolved into who you know. What's your social capital? Who's in your network? What customer base can you bring? And how are you able to provide a level of influence? Like, we now have influencers as a job that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
And
How
today,
active are you on LinkedIn?
yeah, exactly right. And today, what we now have is psychological capital. So, who are you as a person? What is your attitude, your mindset, your values? So, these are the things that are becoming a lot more intangible and harder to measure. It doesn't mean that those other things don't matter. We still care about things like qualifications, experience, network. But interestingly, it's psychological capital. What it's known as is the psychological resources required for success, and what I would consider the meta skill for how you then develop other skills. Because if I have the right attitude and I'm very willing to learn, resilient, resourceful, that means that although maybe I don't know how to I don't know, put together a PowerPoint presentation, I've got the right mindset that will enable me to develop those skills such that I can learn it. And so it doesn't matter that I don't have that technical skill of being able to use this specific software, because I've got the right mindset to navigate my way through that. And so this idea of having psychological capital, having this growth mindset, is what's considered a foundation that enables us to be able to overemphasize, or like sort of better recognize the value of these intangible attributes, these psychological mindset attributes of an individual beyond what we might just find of them on paper.
So, how many organizations actually recruit, from a, employee acquisition perspective, recruit employees and go through, go through that whole employment process, looking at the psychological capital of these employees? To what extent is that something that they actively, look at, as opposed to, do you have SAP? How many years of experience do you have? This, do you have this? In terms of their qualifications and the types of, skills and experiences they might have.
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I do think that we're making some strides toward looking for these capabilities. There are still many organizations that are very focused on human capital, like what are your qualifications? How many years experience do you have? And what logos do you have in your CV?
Okay.
That give us an indicator. Of course, what that means is we're missing out on a huge pool of great talent that might not necessarily have the same opportunities to have gotten a fancy degree from a nice university, or had the opportunity to work for a big consulting firm like I don't know, like a Deloitte or whatever it might be, but doesn't necessarily have any relationship to their psychological capital, their attitude. And so psychological capital is actually made up of 4 different constructs. And that's through the acronym HERO. So HERO. H stands for hope. Do you have a sense of like, and it's almost like a visionary kind of mindset where are you hopeful for the future? Do you believe that, that there is, something greater ahead of us on this journey? Because that's really motivating for us.
Yeah.
Um, the second one is efficacy. Do we feel like we have a sense of self-efficacy, like self-confidence in our abilities? So our strengths, for instance. The next R is for resilience. Are we able to withstand against hardship and be tenacious as we come up against different challenges, but persevere through it?
Mm.
And then lastly is optimism. Do we see the world as a glass half full, and can recognize the benefits of how we perceive the world in terms of, you know, looking at through a positive lens. And so hero, how can we find our heroes in today's day and age, for hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism?
That's great.
So all of this is coming from positive psychology concepts and theories. So motivational psychology, Ryan and DC's are three basic psychological needs. Now, I consider this to be the next step, or the next evolved framework after Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if we go back to Maslow's hierarchy, recall that we've got love and belonging or connection, we've got self-esteem, and then we've got self-actualization. Reflecting on those a little bit more closely, what you'll realize is that a lot of them are deeply connected to psychological needs rather than physiological needs. And so if we look at it now through the lens of self-determination theory, which is these three basic psychological needs, they are made up of having a sense of autonomy or agency and independence and freedom and choice in the work that we do. So in today's day and age, that might look like flexibility, for instance. There's also competence. Do we feel like we're competent in the work that we're doing? And are we able to play to our strengths? Do we see growth opportunities there for us? And then finally, relatedness. Do we have a sense of connection to the people that we work with, to the purpose that our organization has, and, in a way that enables us to relate our personal selves to our professional selves. And so those three aspects, typically, if an employee is considering leaving their organization, and it's because they don't feel like they have a sense of autonomy. Maybe they don't have a sense of flexibility in their work, or they feel like they're trying to be controlled or micromanaged and they want more freedom. Or they don't feel like they're doing that. Maybe they've hit a plateau and they're not given like development opportunities to really grow their capabilities, play to their strengths, and lean into that. So competence. And then thirdly, do they feel like they feel a sense of connection, belonging, and inclusivity with the team that they're a part of, or the culture they're a part of? And so relatedness. And it's very easy when someone's considering why they might be dissatisfied or why they might be thinking about moving on to a new role. If you ask why enough, you can typically narrow it down to one of these three reasons. They don't have a sense of autonomy, they don't have the opportunity to be competent in the work that they're doing, or they don't feel a sense of relatedness or connection to the people that are there.
Is connection one of those areas that is harder to find with people working in a hybrid, working partly from the office, partly from home, 100% remote? And I wonder sometimes if organizations understand the importance of it and how they need to kind of cultivate that and grow that when we're working flexibly and in different sorts of, formats.
Yeah. It's been an interesting journey to navigate the impact of, hybrid working or remote working on this. And interestingly, there are some research papers out there that have found that there has been no impact on
Wow.
a sense of connection. Now, the specific study that I'm thinking about was actually focused on engineers, and so what I would be really interested in looking into is the research behind how that might be different for a different kind of employee or persona profile. Now, my personal experience being an extrovert is that I want to be around other people, you
Yeah.
know, and I get my energy from being around other people, and I you know, my own sense of feeling connected to the work that I do, has it changed? No, because I feel a great sense of autonomy and competence in the work that I do. If I didn't have those things, I would need to level up my sense of connection, because that would be the thing that would keep me there, you know.
That's the kicker. Yeah. So I guess whatever area isn't, you're not feeling that sense of autonomy, then one of the others needs to kind of over index really.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And so, introducing now, this is SeenCulture's collective intelligence framework. And I introduce this because a lot of the focus thus far in this presentation has been around, you know, how can we improve things on an individual level, from an employee perspective, and then also from a leadership perspective. But what's really interesting is how we look at the systemic perspective when we're looking at teams or workforces as a whole. And so, the collective intelligence framework is made up of 5 different dimensions: mindset intelligence, social intelligence, teaming intelligence, business intelligence, and then domain intelligence. Now, mindset intelligence is very highly aligned to psychological capital. You know, how do you think and what is your attitude? You know, I refer to this as the meta skill for some of the other things. We then also have social intelligence, how you relate and interact to others socially. We then have teaming intelligence, how do you motivate a group of people? Business intelligence which is kind of like enterprising intelligence in terms of how you drive business growth. So, you know, what is your commercial acumen? And then there's domain intelligence, your subject matter expertise. Now, all of this is based on a lot of the research that I've done in terms of what are the contributors of individual, team, and organizational drivers of performance. Now, what a lot of organizations tend to fall short on is their ability to assess those more intangible factors versus their tangible ones. And so when we're either recruiting new candidates into a role, or we're assessing them for a promotion or a job opportunity in the workplace, where there tends to be more focus is in their domain intelligence. What are the hard skills that they have? And actually, research shows that this is much less relevant and a much weaker predictor of future potential and performance relative to all of these other dimensions, where mindset matters more, social network matters more, your ability to pull together, you know, different teams. And so these elements are what we have found to be the driving factors of organizational performance. But it's not that we would expect any one individual to be exceptional at all of these things. You know, going back to this idea of how do we showcase our unique strengths, and how does that contribute to the goal of the team? It's very much inspired by, you know, some of you have probably heard the quote, "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts." Now, in staying true to that quote, what we're really trying to do is demonstrate, well, if we were able to identify the unique capabilities that individuals have and enable them to focus in on that and not dilute their energy and impact into other areas that don't really serve you know, their outputs, like their weaknesses, but they're
Yeah.
able to partner up with other people in the team as well. That enables them to be higher performing in the thing that they're good at. And so if you think of the analogy of a sports team, we have players that play very specific positions, and they train relentlessly in playing their best in that specific position rather than every other position. Now, it would be no use if someone who's a shooter is playing goalie, right? You're just diluting their impact. And so we can have the same philosophy for teams in organizations as well.
That's a great analogy, and it's actually not something that I've thought of. So it's that whole thing of building a team, working on the individual strengths of your team members,
Mm-hmm.
and getting them to focus and develop just on those strengths.
Exactly right. Yeah. And so one of the things at SeenCulture that we really acknowledge and really care about is, the diversity, equity, and inclusion of workplaces. Now, when we think of diversity, often we can reduce it down to the demographic makeup of our workforce and of individuals. But what really matters, certainly from a SeenCulture perspective, is not necessarily who they are on the inside, who they are on the outside, but who they are on the inside. What are the strengths and capabilities that they have that aren't as visible to us, but that we should be intentional about really understanding in order to truly see their value and their contribution. And so at SeenCulture, what we do is focus more on diversity of perspective and diversity of thought, more than we do diversity of demographic. Now, I know from my own personal experience, if I'm recognized for some sort of opportunity and I get profiled as, Nikki Tugano, Asian woman gets XYZ, that's much less meaningful to me than, Nikki Tugano, founder who is resilient and resourceful and relentless in her passion. Like that, earlier narrative about profiling my demographics undermines my capabilities in such a way that then has an impact on how other people then perceive my contribution. And so this is what brings rise to the importance of making sure that we're not just reporting on, gender stats or ethnic backgrounds when we care about diversity, that we're looking at, what is the diverse perspectives and experiences that we're also, needing to shine a light on.
That's such an important point. And it's one of those things that it's almost, I do feel sometimes with DEI that it does get reduced to things like race and sex and gender. How, in terms of, I'm really interested to know in terms of the different areas in terms of the SeenCulture framework, how do you measure some of those? Because obviously some, I'm sure there are different types of measurement frameworks that you use to identify some of these things, but some of them would be, I imagine, really challenging to measure.
Absolutely. And the way that we measure, some of these capabilities is based on how an individual is seen for what they've contributed through their work. Now, and this is a big part of why it's important for us to capture different perspectives on how we're seen. Some of you might be familiar or have experienced doing 360-degree feedback. And so we would use a similar methodology where we're asking a number of different people what is their perspective on how someone is seen as it relates to their strengths and their potential. That enables us to mitigate against things like personal bias and the Dunning-Kruger effect, where we tend to overestimate our own capabilities relative to how other people experience it. But also, it's really important to understand that when we do purely self-reported assessments, that's one data point on an individual on themselves. And so we work within dynamic teams, like, in a way that means that we're always collaborating. And so you could argue that the perspective of others is probably a bit more meaningful, certainly as it relates to the strengths that you're seen for, versus what is my own perspective of my own strengths on myself. And that's only one data point. So we make sure we capture, at least 5 or so different perspectives on how you're seen for your strengths and your potential.
Okay, great.
And one way that we do that is so what I've got here is a little bit of an example of a very quick snapshot. So on the left here, we've got a scene spotlight where we're inviting people to, if there is someone that that you think deserves a bit of a spotlight because they are untapped talent that deserves to be recognized. We are running a campaign as part of International Women's Day for the month of March on women that we think need to be seen. And as part of doing that, what we're asking is, okay, well, for these women that, are untapped talent that deserves this recognition, what is their strengths that they're seen for? I've got an example here of one that was done for me where I'm seen to be driven and resourceful and adaptable. But then we also shine a light on what is that untapped talent. So in this case, analytics, it's something that I don't get the opportunity to really play to nearly as much as I used to anyway. But there's some potential there because it is a strength. It's just not being leveraged or played to. We also capture some, qualitative insights and comments, and this AI blended endorsement. So people will contribute, some comments on what this person's strengths are. We use AI to synthesize it into one sentence, which enables us to also de-identify where some of those comments are coming from, but really capture the essence of how you're seen. So a tenacious, passionate, and contagious beacon of energy. And then here where you see these numbers on the right-hand side in green and yellow is how many different perspectives have I gotten that helps build a picture of this scene profile of mine, right? And so this is just a snapshot that we're inviting people to do for free and sign up for free. If you want to check it out, just reach out to me, Nikki Tugano, or on LinkedIn. Or you can email me, Nikki at SeenCulture.com. But we're running this for free for anyone that wants to either for themselves be seen, or they know some other people that want to be seen. And of course, there are some other options following this if you're interested, where you get a full synopsis and deep dive on your capabilities.
That's great.
Thank you. Yeah. Now, from a leadership perspective, we have an enterprise platform that enables them to identify who across the organization is that unseen talent. And so it's a decision intelligence platform that almost acts as like a talent or a team search engine, where they can literally just pop in, oh, I want to find the person that's the best at BD or sales or networking. And based on all of the 360-degree feedback that's been captured for all of the employees in the organization, they're able to find who those people are. And so what that's promoting is this idea of more decentralized or democratized decision-making when it comes to how you recognize talent. And I'll just leave you with this last slide. Now, at SeenCulture, our vision is to create a world where everyone feels seen, despite being underrepresented, neurodiverse, or simply introverted. And that's because we believe that everybody is a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. And so how can you shine a light on what their unique strength is in the workplace? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nikki. That was a fantastic presentation. If anyone has any questions that they would like Nikki to answer, if you could just pop them in the chat, and we will get to them during the course of this session. One question I have, if an organisation is keen to move to a positive psychology method in terms of how they, how they look to, develop their employees, where do they start if they don't have, if they don't have that kind of history or background?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a ton of resources that are out there. And I would say, as a starting point, being intentional about just the ways in which you're recognizing people for their strengths instead of for their weaknesses. It's really important that we have that mindset shift. And, you don't necessarily need a background in any of it. It's just questioning, for instance, at SeenCulture, one of our values is to have a bias to strengths. And we mean that in every way. And so being intentional about those behaviors and how that comes up, I think is really important. There are a number of profilers out there, such as there's the Strengths Finder by Gallup. There's also Capfinity's Strengths Profile. And then there's also it's a free one that's called the Values in Action Strength Survey, and that focuses on values in action and character strengths. They're amazing resources. What I will say though is that they are purely self-reported measures, and so it is capturing the one perspective on the strengths that they believe they have it themselves. Of course, if you're interested in the Seen strengths profile, then reach out to me or jump on our website or find me on LinkedIn, and we're really happy to help.
Okay, great. And do you have any case studies, de-identified case studies of some organizations that have adopted a, positive psychology or strengths-based approach, and what sort of the outcomes have been for them?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a few case studies that are out there. I'm just trying to think what might be the best one. So the very first use case actually for SeenCulture was when we were helping a leadership team. They're actually the board of an organization, a consulting firm, that we're trying to identify who are the best candidates to be, to be identified as potential contenders for their succession plan. So two board members were leaving, and they were trying to identify who might their successors be. Now, typically what they would do is make a quick decision and go, oh, well, I know so-and-so for so many years. They have a similar background to me. And they'd be really great. But what they started to realize is that they were looking at more cookie cutter approaches to the same capabilities that already existed within the team. And so I asked them, well, as a team, what are the strengths that you would wish, this team would have? And being intentional about trying to find those capabilities in the workplace. Now, they asked me to profile all of the directors in the organization. And I said, sure, I can do that. However, you've made an assumption that your successors are only going to be in the cohort of directors when there might actually be untapped talent in the lower levels of the hierarchy. And so after then rolling out SeenCulture across the whole organization, what was really great when we ran a search criteria based on the strengths that they wanted their leadership team to be seen for, we were able to uncover untapped talent. They were actually 2 levels down from the directors that were complementary and provided complementary strengths to the existing strengths that the team already had, that were able to plug the gaps. And what that meant was, as a whole, they were a better performing team.
And they're looking more widely than what they would
Exactly.
normally do because they have that data available to them.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that's great. Is there a lot of, or what would be the sort of common resistance for implementing this type of approach in a business that you've seen or experienced?
Yeah, I guess a lot of the problem tends to be that they're not really recognizing the, a lot of people tend to work to solve for symptoms rather than sources. So the band-aid fix to, for instance, someone leaving would be, oh, let's do a straight swap in, swap out. We need to make a decision. We have to onboard them quickly because we're going to be, short-staffed on this. And so they'll make a quick decision. They'll find someone that they already know, put them in place, and then just do a straight replacement of that individual. Now, the better solution would be to think a little bit more strategically about it and go, well, let's look at the team overall, and might we be able to find some existing capabilities that aren't being tapped, where we don't actually need, to get a straight replacement for this individual because we can capture it in the aggregate. And there's a really great example of this in the Moneyball movie, where they're actually replacing players in the aggregate rather than at an individual level, which is really interesting. But that, sorry, I'm not sure if I answered your question now that I'm thinking about it.
No, I was going to say I've never seen Moneyball, but it is on my must-watch list now after this session, and we do like sporting movies, so that's good. It was about sort of the common types of resistance to
Ah,
implementing this type of approach.
yeah, the common resistance would be that it feels quicker and easier to not use data-driven approaches, right? To
Yeah, it
just
takes too
say,
long.
oh, yeah, Joe Blogs, he's the guy, let's
Yeah,
get him in. But and so that's probably a lot of people tend to think that they know their people and they
yeah,
know what's best for their organization, but they're only one perspective. And
yeah,
so it's getting the common barrier is really them understanding what their limitations are if they're not outsourcing different people's perspectives on whose capabilities are really valued.
yeah. There's a lot of, I know this person, they're a known and proven sort of person, and we'll
Mm,
just bring them in, as
yeah.
opposed to kind of going, all right, let's do a bit of a look at, the team overall.
Mhm.
What are the strengths? What are the gaps? Who can step up? Who can, thinking about it a little bit more broadly.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, thanks so much. So if people would like to connect with you, they can do that via SeenCulture or via LinkedIn as well. And I was going to say, enjoy the rest of your conference in Vegas. And thank you so much for presenting today. It's been really interesting. And thank you to everyone for attending.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure for me to speak about this stuff that I'm so passionate about. So I appreciate the opportunity so much.
Oh, you're such an engaging presenter, and I love hearing you speak. I've witnessed a couple of your webinars, so it's been really great. All right, well, thank you very much, Nikki, for today, and we will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.